I don't want to be on my deathbed holding regret. You got to tackle it at some point. You got to face it head on. And I want to do it now when I'm capable and I'm able, not my dying days. Own your mess. Right? That's what I'd say. I take responsibility. And if you can do that, then simplicity does lie on the other side of complexity.
Welcome to this episode, which is my reflections on my conversation with Stephen Keys. What follows are 6 reflections drawn from his journey, moments of insight that carry particular resonance, I think, for men navigating midlife transitions. And I've included 2 experiments that you may want to think about playing with if they resonate for you. The first one I'm calling What Breaks Your Saunter. Stephen borrows a phrase from an art professor at the National University of Singapore to describe a moment a career decision became clear for him. It wasn't through spreadsheet analysis or any kind of rote decision making, but through something that really stopped him in his tracks. The professor's exercise was to walk through an art gallery until something breaks your saunter. It's really an exercise in attending to what matters before your rational mind talks you out of it. Now, we know from research by psychologist Jonathan Haidt that moral and emotional intuitions precede our reasoning, with rational thought often arriving after the fact to justify what we already feel. Steve's decision to leave a group CEO role, heading for an IPO, in favor of a regional leadership role that offered him a chance to build a community development foundation was, by any conventional metric, a demotion. Yet something in him knew this was a path to follow. Now, this connects powerfully to work by Michael Puett and Christine Gross-Low. They wrote a book called The Path, which argues that ancient Chinese practice of paying close attention to small emotional signals, the moments when something feels off or unexpectedly right, is far more reliable as moral guidance than some grand philosophical reasoning. Now, we've heard this before. Previous guests like Matthew Lumsden and Craig Williams shared decisions which ultimately shaped a life that wasn't logical at the time of the immediate thought process. Now, the invitation here from Stephen in our interviews to slow down enough to notice what breaks your saunter. In an art gallery, maybe, but not necessarily. Any aspect of your life. What meetings, conversations, or activities leave you quietly energized, even when you can't explain why? What are you ignoring because it doesn't fit the narrative of who you're supposed to be? And here's an experiment around this. And I've tried this myself many times, and I've recommended it to people many times over the years. And here's what it is. Over the next, let's say 2 weeks, keep a brief, and I mean really brief, daily log, 3 sentences maximum. At the end of every day, note one moment that surprised you by how it made you feel positively or negatively. Don't analyze it, just note it. After 14 days, review the log and look for patterns. What do they tell you about what's actually mattering to you, as opposed to what you think should matter? I've been surprised many times. Anybody I've given this exercise to has been surprised many times. Let me know how it works for you. My second reflection is the persona we carry versus the person we are. Steve spoke about recognizing in retrospect that he has spent some years carrying a professional persona, disciplined, driven, commercially focused, and that was genuinely part of him, but not all of him. He describes this as outsourcing the other parts, the creativity, the connection, the desire for community. His wife managed relationships with the other parents. Friendships became transactional. His interior life was deferred indefinitely. Psychologist Don McAdams calls this the personal narrative, the story we construct about who we are, which functions as both compass and a cage. For us in midlife, Erik Erikson's framework of generativity versus stagnation is really instructive. What he talked about is the second half of life calls us towards contribution, integration, but the shift requires us first to acknowledge the parts of ourselves we've left at the door of the boardroom. Other writers, including Brené Brown, her research on wholehearted living arrives at the exact same conclusion. She says the professional armour that helps us succeed in the early part of a career can become the very thing that prevents us from living fuller in later life. I love Stephen's articulation of this. He said, I felt they were necessary. They were necessarily close to what it means to be successful in that role. But I measure success very, very differently now. This is a theme we've explored before with Ben Lark, the psychologist, and he said what we suppress doesn't disappear. It simply accrues interest and demands repayment at a time not of our choosing. My third reflection is community as a core value, from transaction to belonging. Now, this is one of the most important reflections I've had since listening to Stephen's conversation, and that is the central importance of community in all of our lives. I'm recording this after spending the weekend on a farm in Kangaroo Valley, 2 hours south of Sydney, at a music festival, a mini music festival. Some friends have got together, hired out one of their friends' farm, booked some music, booked some bands, and invited 400 friends. We had the best weekend. And Stephen's central insight from years of inner work is this: arriving through a corporate values exercise, tested by his divorce, confirmed through volunteering, and the foundation in Sri Lanka, is that community is not just something he values, but the organizing principle of a life well lived. The irony for him was that he had been outsourcing the very thing he needed most. A sociologist called Robert Putnam conducted a landmark study that he called Bowling Alone, where he documented the dramatic decline of social capital in Western society since the 1950s. He documented the erosion of civic clubs, neighborhood associations, religious communities, and informal networks that once gave people a sense of belonging, or at least mutual obligation. In his study, he specifically said that Americans, becoming increasingly disconnected from family, friends, neighbors, and democratic structures, were resulting in weakened civic engagement and community cohesion. His research demonstrated that loneliness and social disconnection are not merely personal misfortunes, but actually structural features of modern individualism. Of course, this does not just apply to America. It applies to many countries and to many individuals. Our sense of individualism has overtaken us at the cost of our sense of community. In my interview with Stephen, he referenced a gentleman called Cormac Russell, who offered a compelling framework through his asset-based community development model. Rather than asking what's wrong with a community, and therefore what does it need from the outsider, he's asking what's already strong in the community and how can we serve as useful enablers of what's already there. And that's exactly what Stephen's Foundation did in Sri Lanka, and is equally applicable to the communities we inhabit in our own lives. For men navigating midlife, the research is completely unambiguous. Social connection is one of the most powerful predictors of healthy aging, cognitive longevity, and resistance to depression. We come back to this time and time and time again on this podcast. The Harvard Study of Adult Development, which is the longest running study of human well-being in history, concluded after 80 years that the quality of our relationships is the single greatest determinant of how well and how happily we age. Not wealth, not fame, relationships. In an upcoming episode, I'm talking to 2 guys on the circles they have set up: a music club, a book club, a biking club. Sounds simple. Believe me, it's profound. My fourth reflection is you have nothing, but you still have something to give. One of the most quietly powerful moments of my conversation with Stephen is a reflection on a period when he was, as he put it, on the bones of his arse, financially depleted after divorce, estranged to varying degrees from his sons, lonely in a way that the usual solutions couldn't fix. And yet, almost out of desperation, he began to volunteer. First a soup kitchen, then Willing Hearts in Singapore, then refereeing football matches, then Kids Giving Back. The insight that emerged crystallized in a session at Kids Giving Back, where a person with lived experience of homelessness told a room of children that giving someone eye contact and a genuine greeting costs nothing and means everything. is that dignity is always within our capacity to offer, regardless of our own material circumstances. Viktor Frankl wrote a famous book called Man's Search for Meaning, and in it he said, the last of human freedoms to go is the freedom to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. The act of giving, of being of service, however simple it is one of the most reliable routes to meaning available to us, particularly in the moments when we feel we have least to offer. Now, that's a very famous book, and it's consistent with research by Laura Acton and Elizabeth Dunn. They did research on cross-cultural studies on what they call pro-social spending, i.e. giving in a proactive way for the social good of somebody else. And the giving demonstrated the act of giving produces measurable boosts to the well-being and life satisfaction of the giver, even more so than the person receiving it. They even found global evidence of happiness by studying data from 136 countries, that there was a consistent pattern across all countries where positive association with giving to charity or buying gifts for somebody else led to higher levels of subjective well-being. Now you might say, oh yeah, but they were rich countries. No, the studies looked at rich countries such as Canada and poor countries such as Uganda and India and found the exact same positivity landed for the giver, irrespective of how poor that giver was. This validates Steve's experience. In his weakest and indeed maybe even poorest moment, he chose to give, and it gave back to him. My fifth of 6 reflections is what I'm calling slow is smooth, smooth is fast. Stephen learned this lesson at the Rice Kitchen in Willing Hearts in Singapore, standing at 4:30 a.m. in a production line serving 8,000 meals a day, being tutted by the aunties running the kitchen when his rice wasn't cooked properly because he rushed the process. Now, this principle is borrowed both from Formula One driving and from Navy SEAL training, and that is that urgency without discipline produces chaos, and that the fastest route to an excellent outcome is often a deliberate, steady rhythm rather than frenetic effort. He applied it immediately to his inner life, and he is, by his own admission, someone who gets agitated quite easily. The Rice Kitchen became a meditation. Slow down. Find the rhythm. Trust the process. Don't let the noise, internal or external, make you rush in a way that undoes the work. Now, this connects directly to neuroscience, the neuroscience of performance under pressure, and specifically to research by Sian Belloc at the University of Chicago on choking, the phenomena where skilled performers underperform in high-stakes conditions. And her research consistently found that the culprit is self-monitoring. The moment we start to consciously attend to an automatic process, we disrupt it. The antidote is exactly what Stephen discovered in the Rice Kitchen. Routinize the process, slow the rhythm, trust the body. For we men in midlife who are navigating major transitions, be it career changes, relationships reconstructions, the care of aging parents along raising adult children, the temptation is to accelerate, to force resolution, to out-effort the complexity. Stephen's counsel, earned in a Singapore Rice Kitchen at dawn, is to resist that temptation. My last reflection, based upon my conversation with Steve, is this: simplicity lies on the other side of complexity. Now, Stephen closes our conversation by borrowing a phrase that actually I gave to him, as it turned out, and that quietly summarizes the architecture of his entire journey. Simplicity lies on the other side of complexity. You cannot bypass the dark forest. You have to enter it. Lose your bearings, encounter what you've been avoiding, and trust that there is another side on the other side. Now, this maps directly onto Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, that famous monomyth that underlies virtually every great story, every great movie that's been told, from ancient mythology to modern cinema. The hero is called to adventure. They refuse, then they accept, then they descend into the underworld, then they face trials, and they return transformed with gifts to share with the community. What Campbell emphasized and what Hollywood routinely misses is that the transformation only occurs because the hero endured the underworld, not in spite of it. Stephen quoted Dante, the poet, at the end of the episode, and Dante begins his great journey with exactly this promise. Midway upon the journey of our life, I found myself within a forest dark, for the straight water path had been lost. The dark forest is not a metaphor for failure, it's a necessary precondition for a larger life. I mentioned Viktor Frankl earlier on. He wrote about this. Robert Keegan has written about this. Richard Rohr, in his book Falling Upward, writes about this. The same dynamic from different traditions, and that is, the first half of our life, we build a container, an identity, a career, a self. The second half is about filling it with something that actually matters. The container must be built first, but at some point must also be examined, questioned, and in some cases, broken open. Stephen's counsel to us is not to romanticize the dark forest, but to resist the temptation to live perpetually on its edge, hoping to avoid entry. Own your mess, face it, and trust as he has that a kind of simplicity awaits on the other side. I hope you enjoyed that reflection. If you want a physical copy of it, go to don'tlettheoldmanin.com/reflections. You can download a copy of this. You can also sign up for our weekly newsletter where I'll share these and other things. And if you have any thoughts on what you think other episodes could be, there's a suggestion part on our website now where you can leave your thoughts for future episodes. We will absolutely listen to those. In the meantime, don't let the old man in.